Hello and welcome. This is Out Motorsports. My name is Jake and this is the 2021 Mazda CX-9 Signature. Now this is the largest crossover in Mazda's crossover lineup. It sits above the CX-5 and the CX-30. And while we have driven both the CX-5 and the CX-30, we've never driven a CX-9, and I really wanted to get my hands on one because I know several people who own them. Everyone seems to love them, and in some cases they've bought or leased one and then bought or leased another one right after they decided it was time for the first one to go away. So what makes the CX-9 so great, and what has Mazda done to change it up for 2021? Well, let's get into that. Before we do, please take a second and be sure to subscribe to the channel. We really appreciate all your support, and the more of it we have, the more fun stuff we can do with new cars like this Mazda, a bunch of fun older cars, and motorsports, which is of course the reason why we're here in the first place. So with that, thank you for the support, and back to the Mazda. Like I said, this is the 2021 CX-9. This iteration of CX-9 has been out for a few years at this point, and this is kind of the mid-cycle of its life where Mazda's looking to give it a little nip and tuck, a little refresh to keep it fresh for another year or two at minimum. And what they have done for this year is just some styling updates both inside and out, and then the biggest deal of all is that they've updated their infotainment system in this car. It used to be on the older version of Mazda Connect, and now it is on the new version of Mazda Connect, which uses a little bit higher resolution screen. It's a 10.25-inch widescreen, and it is really beautiful. It fits nicely in the dash, and it of course supports Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Now, of course, we are always concerned with the driving experience first and foremost, so we will talk more about that infotainment, but first let's talk about what powers this 2021 CX-9. If you've driven any other 2.5-liter turbocharged Mazda in recent history, it is going to be the same engine that you drove in any of those other cars in this 2021 CX-9. Yes, they are selling the 2.5 turbo, they call it Skyactiv-G, in the smallest Mazda 3 sedan and hatch and the smallest Mazda CX-30 crossover. And they're using it in the CX-9, which is the biggest vehicle that they sell. And in all cases, it makes the same power and the same torque, and that is 250 horsepower and 320 pound-feet of torque. It's important to note, especially in the three-row crossover segment, these are really hot commodities no matter who's making them. This car does require using premium fuel if you want to make those maximum power figures. It will run on 87, it is fine to run on 87, however, you paid for all this power and torque, and you're only going to get it if you run it on premium gas. If you run it on regular, you will lose some horsepower and some torque. I believe the figures go down to 227 horsepower and 310 pound-feet. So it's not the biggest loss, but it is a loss. In my personal opinion, you paid for all of it, so you might as well use it, but you do have to use 93 octane. Now, looking at this 2.5-liter Turbo 4, it does put all of the power to the wheels through Mazda's now standard corporate 6-speed automatic torque converter transmission, and it goes out to all four wheels through their iActive all-wheel drive system. All of those are, again, pretty standard on any Mazda that comes with the 2.5 turbo at this point. So again, if you've driven it before, it's the same drivetrain, it's just been upsized to fit the CX-9. It's important to note that curb weight plays a really big part of all this because this is the same drivetrain you'll get in the CX-30, it's the same drivetrain you'll get in the smallest Mazda 3 hatchback, and you get it here. And the CX-9 is clearly larger than all of those other Mazdas, and it is of course heavier, and it's also designed to put more people and things in it. This is a 6 or 7 passenger crossover, not a 4 to 5 passenger hatchback. So it's worth noting that yes, this is a great drivetrain, but the CX-9 weighs 1,100 pounds more than a Mazda 3 hatch, and making a more reasonable comparison to, let's say, the CX-5, the CX-9 is still about 570 pounds heavier. And again, that's before you put any people or things in this car. So is it enough power and torque? Let's get it on the road and see how it actually is to drive. All right, so driving the 2021 Mazda CX-9 Signature. I'm gonna go ahead and talk about the infotainment screen first because I mentioned we'd get into it, and normally I wouldn't talk about tech, but I do have a really nice thing to say about it, and I really wish more manufacturers would do what Mazda's doing here. So Mazda replaced their older Mazda Connect infotainment with this updated version that is in some of their other cars. It's kind of proliferating the model lineup as they revise each different model in the lineup. And it is a widescreen, it's 10.25-inch wide in this case, and it uses a much more modern version of the software than their older system. So if you used an older version of Mazda Connect and didn't really like it, this is a much more classy, elegant looking system that's much easier to use. It really fits thematically with what Mazda's trying to do with their cars in general, which is just to elevate them to be kind of that near luxury level. And the other nice thing comes in with Apple CarPlay, and I can't say for Android Auto because I don't have an Android phone, but I'm assuming it's going to be similar. Apple CarPlay will allow the manufacturer to use the full width of their screen if they code the system to do it. And I have gotten irrationally bent out of shape as someone whose day job sometimes involves a lot of user interface, user experience type work. I've gotten a little bent out of shape over other manufacturers who have these beautiful widescreen displays and don't actually program CarPlay to use the full width. There's no one brand in particular that does it, but so many of them do it, and it's really just such a bummer because you have this wonderful amount of real estate and then a third of it gets taken up by a big black box because they didn't go that far to say, okay, CarPlay, you can be widescreen. So in Mazda's case, they have made it a full widescreen interface, whether you're using the standard Mazda software or CarPlay, and it is so nice. People will complain about the fact that this is not a touch screen. You have to use the controller knob down here in the center console. And then of course you've got buttons on the left side of the steering wheel to change tracks and adjust your volume. I'm not complaining, and I'm gonna tell you why. This is coming from someone who also likes the early BMW iDrive, which was also not a touchscreen system. Mazda will tell you that a knob-based system is safer to use while you're moving because you can figure out how many clicks and pushes and taps and whatever with the knob it takes to perform a function, and then you can kind of memorize it. And they're correct. I really have a hard time with vehicles going to all touch interface. I really think it's unsafe unless you're stopped. And yes, it might be a little bit of a pain to navigate CarPlay when you are in motion, but truly you can do a lot of it through voice command, and you can change songs on the steering wheel, and the knob is still pretty good. You'll get used to it if you keep driving it a little bit. So I really would encourage people to give it a shot. Don't write this car off just because it has this beautiful screen that's not a touch screen. So with all of that, let's start talking about how this 2021 CX-9 is to drive. Because like I said, that's why we're normally here. We're here to talk about the driving experience above all else. And with that 2.5 turbo, it's quick. I won't call it fast. In other Mazda vehicles I've driven with it, I've driven the 3 hatchback and I've driven the CX-5, both with the turbo. Tyler's driven the CX-30 with the turbo. And the phrase that we've used is diesel-like, and it still applies here. It's just kind of that low-end grunty motor that doesn't feel like it's got a ton to give at higher revs. And I wouldn't complain normally because I think it feels great in the CX-5. It feels more than great in the Mazda 3 because that's so much lighter. Like I said, it's about 1,100 pounds lighter than this car. And the problem that I have is that when you've got the CX-9, even with just me in it, this is still getting to be a pretty large and heavy vehicle. This is at like 4,400 pounds or so for curb weight. And again, that's before you sit down in it. And I just think that the torque figure is plenty, but you can tell that it kind of runs out of horsepower as you try to rev it more. And it's going to feel really great around town. If most of your driving is just in the city, in the suburbs, not getting past like 45, 55, it feels really punchy, which is what counts for a lot of drivers, especially if you're buying this as a family car. But the other part of what counts for a family car is when you're accelerating down an on-ramp, on the interstate, pulling out to pass someone. And in that case, I don't know if it has it. It feels punchy enough like this, and then if you're already doing 55, 60 and pull out to pass, it'll do it. It's not a bad thing, and this is going to come across like me saying it's really slow, and it's not, but it's not as willing to rev and produce power because it's just, that's not who she is. She's not that kind of girl. So it's not a problem. However, just know what you're getting into. When manufacturers advertise this torque first figure, it's because that's what people drive day to day. So that's what you drive when you're commuting to work. You only drive the torque band. But when you are out on the highway, really trying to make that full throttle pass or merge, that's where you drive horsepower. And I'm not saying this has to be some 450 horsepower behemoth, but even looking at, one of the hottest competitors right now, the Kia Telluride, that produces closer to 300 horsepower than 250. It's somewhere in the 280 to 290 range, and it's just enough more to feel little more punchy, a little more willing to play at those higher speeds. And then the other two things here are with suspension and steering. And in a lot of cases, you get vehicles where manufacturers come up with all these different drive modes and everything's adaptive and it all changes based on the drive mode you pick. And that's all fine and good, but I think sometimes manufacturers overdo it because they think people are gonna mess with the drive mode selector all the time. And thinking about how most drivers behave, they probably won't. And Mazda, I think, has taken a really great approach here in that everything is just the default state. There's no adaptive suspension, there's no active exhaust. There is a sport mode down by the shifter and it will change your steering feel a little bit, your shift points a little bit, your throttle response a little bit, but it's not such a big difference that I'm even bothering to use it here because I think the baseline that Mazda has established is just really well done, especially when it comes to the suspension and the steering. The suspension, I think, is very well damped. It's not too soft, it's not too firm. The CX-9 really handles bad roads pretty well when you get those crazy expansion joints on the highway or some stuff even in town here. You know, if you hit some potholes or some uneven road surfaces, it just does a nice job. Now, getting on the interstate here, like I mentioned, this is the culmination of everything that Mazda stands for. This is not the fastest thing in the world, but it certainly feels pretty good going through an on-ramp. I have a lot of confidence here in how this is handling. The steering feel is pretty nice, and it's all just very predictable. It's very Miata-ish. Is it the biggest, highest revving engine that you'll get in a crossover? No, but you don't really need to rev it. I haven't revved it past 3,500 the whole time, accelerating all the way up to highway speed, and it feels really nice doing it. And as soon as I lift off the throttle, it'll eventually settle itself into one of its taller gears. There we go. But it was holding the gears while I was accelerating through that twisty bit of on-ramp because it knew that I might lift off and reapply throttle. That is some really nice throttle programming from Mazda. And again, I didn't have the car in sport mode. It's just in its normal drive mode. So really appreciate that they have thought that through and just, again, thought about what the default setting ought to be. And I just find it so interesting that the company that brought us the Miata all these years ago, came out in 1990, has done the same thing here with this momentum crossover. The Miata is very much a momentum car, and the CX-5, the CX-30, the Mazda 3, the other smaller Mazdas that come with this 2.5 turbo drivetrain feel faster, just by virtue of having far less weight to pull around. And this is not going to be the outright speed demon, but Mazda has still succeeded in making it feel very, very confidence-inspiring where it counts, and it is that momentum car philosophy applied to a big crossover. So is it the fastest thing in the world? No. Is it the biggest three-row crossover in the world? No. Does it have the most luxury options available in the three-row segment right now? No. There are certain things you can't get on here that you can get on several of the competitors. Is it a good option for the price point? Absolutely. This comes in at about 48 grand. This is the fully loaded model. So if you're not looking for the Signature, you can get it starting at much lower pricing than $48,000. And I think it's worth a look if you are someone who appreciates the driving experience and you're not just looking for all the toys, you're not just looking for the most horsepower. If you're looking at a spec sheet or trying to do a numbers thing, this probably won't win. But if you care about the driving experience and it suits your needs otherwise, I think you'll be pretty satisfied with the CX-9. And that is it for this review of the 2021 Mazda CX-9 Signature. As always, thank you so much for coming along. We really appreciate all of the views, all of the support. And if you would like to keep supporting us, please subscribe to the channel. Be sure to turn on that notification bell so you do not miss a thing. We've got a lot of fun cars and trucks and motorsports and everything coming down the pike. And please give us a follow on Facebook and Instagram at Out Motorsports. If you'd like to connect with other LGBT automotive enthusiasts and motorsports competitors, please also head over to outmotorsports.com. We have a whole community over there and we would love to meet you. Until next time, please stay safe, be well, and we'll see you again soon.